Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across the private ballroom of the Opal Grand Casino in Atlantic City. Hundreds of faces, all wearing masks of civility, filled the space with false laughter and clinking glasses. This was the annual charity gala, where the most powerful criminal families on the East Coast gathered under the pretense of philanthropy. Everyone knew the truth. This was theater. A performance of legitimacy, while deals were struck in shadowed corners and alliances were tested with every calculated smile. Luca Salvatore stood near the bar, a glass of bourbon untouched in his hand. At 34, he commanded attention without effort. Black hair with silver threading through the temples, gray eyes that seemed to catalog every movement in the room, and a tailored Italian suit that fit like armor. The scar cutting through his left eyebrow was the only flaw in an otherwise intimidating perfection. He was the head of the Salvatore family, one of the most feared organizations from Boston to Philadelphia. People stepped aside when he walked. They lowered their voices when he approached. Fear was currency in his world, and he was wealthy beyond measure. 8 months ago, he had hired a freelance accountant named Ilara Bennett to help restructure some of his legitimate holdings. She had come with excellent credentials, a quiet demeanor, and eyes the color of emeralds that seemed to see straight through pretense. At 28, she was brilliant with numbers, patient with his questions, and utterly unafraid of him. That last quality had been what caught his attention. Most people trembled when he entered a room. Ilara had looked up from her spreadsheets, offered a slight smile, and asked if he preferred his coffee black or with cream. Over the months that followed, something unexpected had grown between them. Late nights reviewing financial documents had turned into conversations about art, about family, about the weight of responsibility. She remembered that his mother had died on a Thursday in November. She brought him coffee at 3 a.m. when they worked late, prepared exactly as he liked it. She laughed at his terrible attempts at humor, genuine and unforced. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Luca felt seen as a man rather than a title. He had given her a gift 3 weeks ago, a delicate necklace with an emerald pendant. Nothing extravagant, nothing that would draw attention, just something that matched her eyes. She had worn it every day since. Tonight, she stood across the ballroom in a simple black dress, elegant but understated. The emerald pendant rested against her collarbone. She was speaking with Julian Cross, his consigliere. Her expression animated as she made some point about tax structures. Julian, ever the professional, nodded along, but Luca could see the wariness in his oldest friend's posture. Julian had never fully trusted Ilara, though he had never voiced specific concerns. Just instinct, he would say. Something that does not quite fit. Victor Ashford appeared at Luca's elbow like a serpent sliding through grass. 36, blonde hair styled with precision, blue eyes like chips of ice. He controlled territory in northern New Jersey and had been a thorn in Luca's side for years. Their families had clashed over shipping routes, over casino interests, over a dozen petty grievances that added up to genuine hatred, barely concealed beneath professional courtesy. Salvatore, Victor said, his voice carrying just enough volume to draw attention from nearby guests. I have to say, I am impressed. You have brought your accountant to a family gathering. How very modern of you. Luca took a measured sip of his bourbon, not bothering to look at Victor. Is there a point to this conversation, Ashford? Or are you simply practicing your small talk? Victor laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. I am merely observing that you seem quite attached to your hired help. One might even say distracted. It is unusual for a man of your reputation to keep such close company with someone so, shall we say, ordinary. The insult was deliberate, designed to provoke. Around them, conversations quieted as other family heads sensed potential conflict. This was the danger of gatherings like these. Egos collided, and small sparks could ignite into wars that cost lives and territories. Luca finally turned his gaze to Victor, his expression flat and cold. My business decisions are not your concern, but I appreciate your interest in my affairs. It reveals how little you have occupying your own attention. Victor's smile sharpened. Perhaps. Or perhaps I am simply fascinated by watching a man of legendary control become so predictable. Tell me, does she know what you truly are? Or do you pretend to be something civilized when she is around? The challenge hung in the air, poisonous and deliberate. Luca understood the game immediately. Victor was testing him publicly, forcing him to choose between defending Alara, which would confirm emotional attachment and therefore weakness, or dismissing her, which would preserve his reputation but reveal his priorities to everyone watching. The choice was impossible. And yet, in this world, perception was everything. A leader who could be manipulated through sentiment was a leader who would not survive long. Luca had not built his empire by being soft. He had clawed his way up from nothing, had made decisions that haunted his dreams, had sacrificed pieces of his humanity to protect what mattered. He could not afford to appear weak now, not in front of the 5 families, not when vultures like Victor were already circling. He set his glass down on the bar with deliberate care. Then he turned to face the room fully, his voice carrying across the now silent ballroom. Since Ashford has decided to make a public spectacle, let me be equally clear. Miss Bennett is a freelance accountant I hired for a specific project. She is competent at her job, nothing more. Whatever attachment anyone may have imagined exists only in their desperate need for gossip. Across the room, he saw Alara's face go still. The color drained from her cheeks. Her hand moved unconsciously to the emerald pendant at her throat. Luca forced himself to continue, each word a blade he was driving into something precious. She is a temporary employee, easily replaceable. Her value extends only to her technical skills, which are adequate but hardly exceptional. Beyond that, she holds no significance to me or to this organization. The silence that followed was absolute. Everyone understood what they had just witnessed. A public dismissal, brutal in its completeness. It was a demonstration of priorities, of where sentiment ranked against reputation. It was exactly what men like Victor expected from men like Luca. And then Alara moved. She walked forward through the crowd with steady steps, her spine straight, her chin raised. When she reached the center of the ballroom, she stopped. Her green eyes met Luca's gray ones across the distance. For a moment, he saw everything there. The hurt, the understanding, the death of whatever fragile thing had been growing between them. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, but carried perfectly in the stillness. I accept your rejection, Don. The use of his title, spoken with such finality, hit harder than any accusation could have. She was not crying. She was not pleading. She was simply acknowledging the truth he had just declared and releasing him from any obligation. It was dignity in the face of humiliation, grace under cruelty. It made him look small by comparison, and everyone in the room recognized it. She removed the emerald necklace with steady fingers, let it fall onto the marble floor, where it made a small, bright sound, and then turned and walked toward the exit. No one tried to stop her. No one spoke. They simply watched as she disappeared through the doors and out into the November night. Luca stood frozen, his hands clenched at his sides. Around him, the families began to murmur, approval mixed with curiosity. Victor wore a satisfied smile. Julian's expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes held questions. And deep in Luca's chest, something fundamental cracked. He had done what was necessary. He had preserved his reputation. He had made the correct strategic choice. So why did it feel like he had just destroyed the only real thing in his carefully constructed world? 72 hours had crawled by like broken glass, dragging across skin. Luca sat in the study of his Long Island mansion, staring at a tumbler of scotch he had poured an hour ago, but had not touched. Sleep refused to come. When he closed his eyes, all he saw was Alara's face in that moment before she turned away, the quiet dignity, the emerald necklace falling to the marble floor. That single statement that had somehow stripped him bare in front of everyone who mattered. I accept your rejection, Don. He had tried to convince himself the decision was correct. Strategic. Necessary. In his world, sentiment was a liability that enemies exploited. Victor had been testing him, and he had passed that test by proving nothing could compromise his judgment. The other families had nodded their approval. He had maintained his reputation as a man who put power above everything else, but the victory tasted like ash. The door to the study opened without warning. Julian entered, his expression grim. At 35, Julian Cross had been at Luca's side for over a decade. Loyal, strategic, ruthless when required. He was more than a consigliere. He was the closest thing to a brother Luca had, which made the concern in Julian's dark eyes all the more unsettling. "We have a problem," Julian said without preamble. He dropped a folder onto the desk, photographs spilling across the polished wood. Luca glanced at them. Surveillance images, federal agents, unmarked vehicles positioned near their warehouses, their casinos, their legitimate fronts. "FBI has been watching us for months. This is nothing new." "Look at the dates," Julian insisted, tapping one of the photos. "These operations intensified 8 months ago, right around the time you hired Alara Bennett." The implication hung between them like a blade. Luca's hand tightened around the tumbler. "You think she was working for them?" "I think the timing is not coincidental." Julian pulled out another document, this one showing background records. "I ran a deeper check on her. Everything about her credentials is legitimate on the surface. Excellent education, solid work history. But there are gaps, Luca. Periods where her employment does not quite line up. References that seem too perfect. It has the signature of a constructed identity." Luca stared at the documents, his mind racing through every conversation, every shared moment over the past 8 months. Had all of it been fabricated? The laughter, the late-night discussions, the way she remembered details about his life that most people never bothered to learn. Was that all training? A role she played with the same skill he used to navigate the criminal underworld? "There is more," Julian continued, his voice dropping lower. "Federal prosecutors have been assembling grand juries. They are preparing indictments. Money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy. They are building a case, and the evidence they would need to make it stick would require someone on the inside, someone with access to our financial records." The realization settled over Luca like ice water. Alara had restructured their accounts. She had reviewed transactions going back years. She knew where the money flowed, how it was cleaned, which businesses were legitimate, and which were fronts. If she had been collecting that information systematically, building a case file over 8 months, where is she now? Luca asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Gone. Her apartment was cleared out before we could get there. Lease terminated, no forwarding address, phone disconnected. She vanished completely within hours of the gala." Julian hesitated, then added, "Professional extraction." This was planned. Luca stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the grounds. Dawn was breaking, pale light spreading across the manicured lawns. He should be furious, betrayed, planning retribution against the woman who had infiltrated his organization and his life. But instead, all he felt was a hollow ache and something that felt disturbingly close to admiration. She had fooled him completely, played the role so perfectly that he had never suspected, had made him care about her while systematically dismantling the empire he had spent years building. It was audacious, brilliant, exactly the kind of calculated risk he himself might have taken in her position. "Luca," Julian said carefully, "we need to prepare for what comes next. If she turns over everything she collected, we are looking at federal indictments within weeks. We need to move assets, create distance from certain operations, possibly eliminate anyone who could testify." "No." The word came out flat, absolute. Julian blinked. "No. No eliminations. No witnesses disappearing. That will only confirm their case and bring down more attention." Luca turned from the window. "We handle this strategically." What he did not say, what he could not say, was that the thought of Alara being harmed made his chest constrict in ways he did not fully understand. She had lied to him, used him, betrayed everything, and yet some irrational part of him still saw her face in lamplight, still heard her laugh at his terrible jokes, still remembered the way she had touched his hand when he told her about his mother's death. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered without speaking. "Salvatore." Victor Ashford's voice oozed false sympathy. I hope I am not disturbing your morning. I wanted to offer my condolences on your recent troubles. What do you want, Ashford? I want to help, actually. I have recently confirmed through certain sources that your lovely accountant is in fact FBI, Special Agent Alara Bennett, assigned to the Organized Crime Unit. Quite impressive, really. She had everyone fooled. Luca's jaw tightened. And you are telling me this out of the goodness of your heart? Not exactly. I am telling you this because I have a proposal. You are about to face federal prosecution that could dismantle your entire organization. I have connections, people in useful places who could make certain evidence disappear. Ensure that cases never make it to trial. But such services are expensive. Name your price. 60% of your territory. East Coast shipping routes, 3 casinos in Atlantic City, and your interests in the construction unions. In exchange, the investigation into the Salvatore family evaporates like morning fog. It was extortion dressed as assistance. Victor had orchestrated this somehow, positioned himself to profit from Luca's crisis. And the price he was demanding was not just territory. It was submission. Public acknowledgement that Luca Salvatore had been bested and was now subordinate to Victor Ashford. I will consider your offer, Luca said, his voice neutral. Consider quickly. I doubt the FBI will wait long now that their agent has completed her mission. Oh, and Salvatore? I hope your sister is well. Sophia, is it? Lovely girl. I understand she is studying art history at Boston University. Such a dangerous city these days. The line went dead. Luca stood perfectly still, rage flooding through him in waves so intense his vision briefly darkened. The threat was explicit. Victor was not just demanding territory. He was threatening Sophia, his 24-year-old sister who had nothing to do with any of this, who was pursuing her master's degree completely unaware of the forces now circling her brother. Julian had heard enough of the conversation to understand. I will have a team in Boston within the hour. Full security detail. Do it. And Julian? Luca met his oldest friend's eyes. Find Alara Bennett. I need to talk to her. Luca, that is incredibly dangerous. If she is FBI, I know what she is. Find her anyway. Julian studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. There was something she mentioned once. You remember? About going to a pier in Red Hook when she was stressed. Said her mother used to take her there before she died. Luca remembered. It had been late one night. Both of them exhausted from reviewing contracts. Ilara had been staring out the window at the city lights, and she had told him about her childhood, about losing her mother, about the place she went when the world felt too heavy. He had filed the information away without thinking. One more small piece of the woman he was coming to care about. Now that memory felt like both a gift and a weapon. I will go alone, Luca said. That is foolish. Probably. But if she wanted me dead, I would be dead already. She had 8 months of opportunities. He grabbed his coat. Call me the moment you have confirmation that Sophia is secure. The drive to Brooklyn took 40 minutes through morning traffic. Luca parked 2 blocks away from the pier and walked the rest of the distance. November wind cut across the water, cold and sharp. The pier was mostly empty this early, just a few joggers and one solitary figure standing at the railing, looking out over the gray expanse of water. Ilara. She wore jeans and a simple jacket, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She did not turn when he approached, though he knew she had heard his footsteps. They stood in silence for nearly a minute. 2 people who had shared intimacy, and now existed on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide. You found me, she said finally, her voice quiet. You wanted me to find you. Otherwise you would not be at the one place you told me about. She smiled slightly, though it did not reach her eyes. Maybe. Or maybe I just needed to come here one more time before everything changes. Is it true? FBI? Yes. The confirmation should have angered him. Instead, it just settled like lead in his stomach. How much did you collect? Everything. Financial records, names, transactions, enough to build cases against half the operations on the East Coast. She finally turned to look at him, and he saw the exhaustion in her features. I did my job, Luca. That is what I was sent to do. And us? The conversations, the coffee at 3 a.m, the way you laughed at my jokes. Was that part of the job too? Something flickered across her face. Pain, maybe. Regret. It was supposed to be. All of it was supposed to be a role I played. But somewhere along the way, she stopped, shaking her head. It does not matter now. It matters to me. Why? You rejected me publicly 3 days ago, called me replaceable, insignificant. You made it very clear where I stood. I made a choice I thought was necessary to maintain control. I was wrong. She laughed, a broken sound. You were not wrong. You are exactly who everyone thinks you are. A man who chooses power over everything else. I knew that. I prepared for it. But knowing it and experiencing it are different things. Before he could respond, his phone rang. Julian. Luca answered immediately. Victor Ashford just showed up at the mansion, Julian said, his voice tight. He wants to discuss his proposal in person. And Luca, his men tried to grab Sophia in Boston 20 minutes ago. Campus security stopped them, but it was close. We have her secured now. But this is war. Luca closed his eyes briefly. Victor was escalating, using Sophia as leverage to force submission. The threat was no longer theoretical. I'm on my way, he said, ending the call. When he looked back at Alara, she was watching him with an expression he could not quite read. Your sister? Victor Ashford is trying to use her as leverage against me. He knows about you, about the investigation. He is offering to make it disappear in exchange for most of my territory and my submission to his authority. And if you refuse, he will kill her. Or try to. Luca straightened. I need to go. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. The coffee was real. The conversations were real. Remembering your mother's death date, that was real. I did not plan to care about you, Luca, but I did. I do. Her voice cracked slightly. For whatever that is worth now. Luca looked back at her. This woman who had systematically destroyed his empire, while somehow becoming the only person who had ever truly seen him. It is worth everything, he said quietly. But I do not know if that is enough to fix what is broken between us. Then he walked away, back toward his car and the war that was waiting. Behind him, Alara remained at the pier, her hand pressed against her chest as if trying to hold something together that was already shattered beyond repair. 18 hours after the attempted kidnapping in Boston, Luca stood in the reinforced safe room of his Long Island mansion. Sophia sat on the leather couch, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she had not touched. At 24, she looked younger now, her face pale beneath the artistic bohemian style she usually carried with ease. But her eyes held steel that reminded him why she had survived growing up in their world. I want the truth, she said, her voice steady despite everything. No more protecting me from reality. What is happening? Luca leaned against the wall, arms crossed. The exhaustion of the past days pressed down on him like physical weight. Victor Ashford is trying to force me into submission. He attempted to use you as leverage. That will not happen again, because of the FBI agent. The accountant you rejected at the gala. It was not a question. Sophia had always been perceptive. I saw the footage online. Someone recorded it. The way you dismissed her. The way she walked away. That was cruel. Even for you. It was necessary. Was it? Or were you just being a coward? Sophia set down the mug with deliberate care. I have watched you build this empire. Sacrifice everything for power and control. But I have never seen you look at anyone the way you looked at her in those few seconds before you spoke. And then you destroyed it because someone challenged you publicly. The accuracy of her assessment cut deeper than he expected. The situation is complicated. She is FBI. I know. Julian told me while we were driving here. Sophia stood, moving to face him directly. And somehow she still warned you about the attack on me. Did she not? Julian would not say, but I can read between the lines. Someone gave you intelligence about Victor's plans. Someone who had access to federal surveillance. Luca said nothing, which was answer enough. So let me understand this, Sophia continued. The woman you publicly humiliated, the federal agent whose job is to destroy you, still chose to protect your sister, and you are here, safe behind walls and guards, instead of fighting for her. That does not sound like the brother I know. That sounds like someone who is afraid. Before Luca could respond, his phone vibrated. Text message from an unknown number. He opened it and felt ice flood his veins. The message contained a single photograph. Alara, walking into a nondescript apartment building. The timestamp was from 40 minutes ago. Below the image, 3 words. She is vulnerable. The sender was Victor. The threat was clear. He knew where Alara was, and he was telling Luca that she was within reach. Unprotected, available for whatever retribution Victor deemed appropriate, Luca dialed Julian immediately. I need a location traced. Sending you an image now. While Julian worked, Luca stared at the photograph. Alara looked exhausted, her shoulders hunched against the cold. She was staying somewhere temporary, somewhere that was not an official FBI safe house. That made sense. If she had compromised herself by warning him about Sophia, the Bureau would not be offering protection. She would be isolated, under investigation herself, caught between the world she had sworn to serve and the man she had admitted to caring about. Got it, Julian said. Residential building in Queens. But Luca, if this is a trap, it might be. Assemble a team. I want surveillance on that location immediately. Anyone approaches her, I want to know. You are going after her. Yes. This is insane. She is FBI. Helping her, being seen with her. It confirms everything Victor is accusing you of. The other families will see it as weakness. Then they will see it as weakness. But I will not leave her exposed because of choices I forced her to make. Luca grabbed his jacket. Get me intelligence on Victor's current location. If he is planning to move against her, I want advance warning. And if he is planning to move against you, then we end this. One way or another. Luca drove to Queens alone, despite Julian's vehement protests. The building was older, nondescript, the kind of place someone went to disappear. He found the apartment number through the building directory and knocked. Silence. Then footsteps. The door opened a crack, chain still engaged. Alara's green eyes widened when she saw him. What are you doing here? She demanded. Victor knows where you are. He sent me a photo 30 minutes ago. You are not safe. She laughed, sharp and bitter. I have not been safe since I accepted this assignment 8 months ago. Why do you care? Because he threatened Sophia to get to me, and he will use you the same way. Let me in. We need to talk. For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then the door closed, the chain rattled, and it opened fully. The apartment was bare. Rental furniture. No personal items visible. A laptop sat on the small dining table, FBI documentation scattered around it. She had been working, even now. This is not a safe house, Luca observed. No. I rented it myself. Cash. Under a false name. The Bureau does not know I am here. She moved to the window, peering through the blinds at the street below. My supervisor put me on administrative leave after I warned you about Sophia. They know I compromised the investigation. I am under internal review. You sacrificed your career to protect my sister. I sacrificed my career because watching an innocent woman get hurt was a line I would not cross, even for a case. She turned to face him. Your sister has nothing to do with your crimes. She is collateral damage, and I have seen enough collateral damage to last several lifetimes. Luca studied her. The exhaustion was deeper than he had realized. She looked like someone who had been fighting a war on multiple fronts and losing ground on all of them. When was the last time you slept? That is not relevant. Alara, 48 hours maybe. I do not know. Time gets strange when everything you built your identity around starts collapsing. She laughed again. That same broken sound. I spent 3 years training for undercover work. Passed every psychological evaluation, proved I could maintain cover under pressure, convinced them I was perfect for deep infiltration. And then I went and fell in love with the target. Textbook failure. The admission hung in the air between them. Luca moved closer, slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wanted. She did not move. I told you the truth at the pier. She continued quietly. I did not plan for any of it to be real, but you made it impossible not to care. The way you talked about your mother, the way you protected Sophia, even when she did not know she needed protecting. the nightmares you tried to hide, but I heard anyway through the office door. You are not just the monster the FBI files describe. You are a man who was broken by circumstances and did terrible things to survive. And I understand that more than I should. Your mother, Luca said, remembering fragments of late-night conversations. You said she died when you were 16. Drug overdose, supplied by dealers working for organizations exactly like yours. That is why I joined the FBI. I wanted to destroy the people who destroyed her. Ilara's voice cracked. But then I met you, and the lines I thought were so clear became blurred. You are not some faceless criminal. You are complicated and damaged and capable of genuine care. And I hate that I cannot separate those things anymore. Before Luca could respond, his phone rang. Julian, urgency clear even before he spoke. Victor just issued a summons. He is calling for a meeting of the 5 families. 5 days from now, Newark. Neutral territory. On what grounds? He is accusing you of being compromised by federal infiltration, claiming you represent an existential threat to all the organizations. He wants you removed from leadership, your territories redistributed. This is not a negotiation, Luca. This is a trial, and he is positioning himself as prosecutor, judge, and executioner. Luca closed his eyes briefly. A meeting of the 5 families had not been called in almost a decade. It only happened when the threat was severe enough to risk bringing all the major players into one location. Victor was escalating beyond anything Luca had anticipated. Who else has confirmed attendance? Luca asked. DeMarco, Castellano, and Zhao. All 3 have agreed to convene. They are concerned about federal heat, and Victor is convincing them that you are the source of the problem. Understood. Begin preparations. I will be there. He ended the call and found Ilara watching him with an expression he could not quite read. He is using the investigation I started to destroy you politically, she said. And if the families vote against you, I will be executed. Standard procedure for leadership deemed too compromised to function. Luca stated it matter-of-factly, though the reality of it settled cold in his chest. Victor has been planning this for a while. The provocation at the gala, the attempt on Sophia, confirming your FBI affiliation. He orchestrated everything to lead to this moment. Then do not go. Disappear. Take Sophia and run. Running means abandoning everyone who depends on me. Hundreds of families whose livelihoods are tied to Salvatore operations. They would be absorbed by Victor, or worse. And running means you remain exposed, because Victor will use you to draw me out eventually. Ilara moved closer, her hand reaching out but stopping just short of touching him. Why do you care what happens to me? I betrayed you. I collected evidence to destroy everything you built. Because despite all of that, you are the only person in 8 years who saw me as something other than a weapon or a monster. You laughed at my terrible jokes. You remembered my mother. You brought me coffee at 3 a.m, prepared exactly right. He finally reached out, his fingers gently tilting her chin up so their eyes met. And when forced to choose between your career and protecting an innocent woman, you chose to protect Sophia. That tells me more about who you are than 8 months of investigation ever could. I still have all the evidence. I could still destroy you. I know, and I am choosing to trust you anyway. The vulnerability in that statement seemed to break something in her. She closed the distance between them, her forehead resting against his chest. This is impossible. You know that, right? There is no version of this that ends well. Maybe not. But I would rather fight for something impossible with you than accept a certain future without you. He wrapped his arms around her carefully, half expecting her to pull away. She did not. I am going to that meeting in 5 days, and I am going to expose Victor for what he really is. How? He has the other families convinced that you are the problem, because you are going to help me prove otherwise. You collected intelligence on everyone, not just me. You know where the bodies are buried, figuratively, and sometimes literally. Victor has been manipulating the other families for years, creating conflicts to benefit himself. If we can prove that, we? She pulled back enough to look at him. You want me to work with you against Victor? I want us to survive this, both of us. And that means exposing the real threat before he can execute his plan. Luca held her gaze. I am not asking you to betray the FBI. I am asking you to help stop someone who is worse than me in every measurable way. Someone who threatens innocent people to gain power. Someone who needs to be removed before more people die." Ilara searched his face for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I have evidence on Victor's operations. Communications he thought were secure. Financial transactions that show he has been sabotaging the other families. But using it means I burn every bridge I have left with the Bureau. I know what I am asking. And I know it is not fair. Nothing about this is fair." She stepped back, moving to the laptop on the table. "But you are right about one thing. Victor Ashford is worse. And if I have to choose between protecting institutional protocol and protecting people, I will choose people every time." She opened files, spreadsheets, and intercepted communications filling the screen. "This is what I have on Victor. 3 years of systematic sabotage against DeMarco's shipping operations, manipulation of Zhao's gambling networks, intelligence leaks that benefited only Ashford interests. He has been positioning himself to consolidate power for a long time. You are just the most visible target." Luca studied the data, his strategic mind already assembling how to present this information. "This is enough to turn them. If we can verify authenticity, I can verify it. But Luca, the moment I walk into that meeting and identify myself as FBI, I am committing career suicide. Possibly actual suicide, depending on how the families react. Then we make sure you survive. Julian will help. He is loyal, and he understands strategy better than anyone I know." As if summoned, Luca's phone buzzed with another message. Julian again. "Sophia wants to talk to you. Says it is important." Luca returned to the safe room an hour later to find his sister waiting with the determined expression he recognized from childhood arguments. "I know what you are planning," Sophia said without preamble. "You are going to fight for her. For Ilara." "Yes. Good. Because you love her, even if you are too stubborn to say it. And she loves you, even though it is destroying her career and possibly her life. So stop being an idiot and actually fight for something that matters, instead of just fighting to maintain power." Despite everything, Luca smiled slightly. "When did you become so wise?" "I have always been wise. You just never listened." Sophia stood, moving to hug him tightly. "Bring her here. If you are going into this war, at least keep the people you care about where they are protected. And Luca, do not get yourself killed. I already lost our parents. I refuse to lose my brother too." The next days would be preparation, strategy, and the very real possibility of death. But standing there with his sister's fierce love surrounding him, for the first time in 72 hours, Luca felt something other than despair. He felt purpose. And maybe, just maybe, hope. 24 hours after retrieving Ilara from Queens, Luca's mansion had transformed into a war room. Maps covered the dining table, financial documents were spread across every available surface, and Julian paced near the windows with the restless energy of a man calculating angles of attack and defense. Ilara sat at the table with her laptop, cross-referencing data with the intensity of someone who understood that precision might be the only thing keeping them alive. Sophia had insisted on staying, despite Julian's protests, claiming that if her life was already endangered, she might as well be useful. She proved him wrong by organizing the chaos of information into coherent timelines, her artist's eye for pattern recognition, identifying connections the others had missed. "Victor has been playing a long game," Ilara said, pulling up another encrypted file. 3 years ago, he started systematically undermining DeMarco's shipping routes. Small disruptions at first. A warehouse fire here, a delayed customs inspection there. Nothing that pointed directly to him, but enough to cost DeMarco millions and create openings for Ashford operations to fill the gaps. Julian stopped pacing to examine the screen. DeMarco never suspected it was coordinated. Why would he? These looked like random incidents, bad luck. But the pattern is clear when you map them chronologically. Ilara highlighted dates on a spreadsheet. Every disruption coincided with Ashford expansion in the same territories. He was not just sabotaging a rival. He was engineering a calculated takeover. Luca studied the data with growing understanding. Victor had been building this conspiracy for years, positioning himself as the solution to problems he himself had created. It was brilliant in its ruthlessness and it explained why the other families were willing to convene on his request. They trusted him because he had been helping them solve crises while secretly being the architect of those same crises. "What about Castellano and Zhao?" Luca asked. "Similar patterns?" Castellano lost 3 key ports to regulatory crackdowns over the past 2 years. Each time, the anonymous tips to federal authorities originated from IP addresses that trace back to shell companies Victor controls. Alara pulled up another file. And Zhao's gambling networks were hacked repeatedly, customer data stolen and sold to competitors. The forensics show digital signatures consistent with a cyber team that works exclusively for Ashford interests. So Victor has been attacking everyone while positioning himself as the neutral party offering assistance, Julian summarized. That is why they are listening to him about Luca being compromised. They think he is trying to protect the collective interests when really he is just eliminating the last major obstacle to total control. Exactly. Alara leaned back, exhaustion evident in the lines of her face. If you go into that meeting without proof, they will see you as the threat Victor claims you are. But if we can present this evidence, show them the pattern, they will understand that Victor has been manipulating all of them. There is a problem, Julian said quietly. The source of this intelligence is a federal agent who was embedded in Luca's organization. The moment you reveal yourself as FBI, they will assume this is a bureau tactic to create division among the families. They will not trust anything you say. He is right. Sophia spoke up from where she had been organizing timeline documents. They will think this is exactly what Victor will claim it is. Fabricated evidence designed to save Luca by destroying his accuser. You need independent verification. There is no time for independent verification, Luca countered. The meeting is in 4 days. Then we change the narrative. Alara stood, moving to the window where Julian had been pacing. I do not present as an FBI agent trying to save you. I present as someone you turned. An agent who you convinced to switch sides, which actually demonstrates power rather than weakness. I bring the evidence not as prosecution, but as an offering. Proof that I have value beyond my original mission. Julian shook his head immediately. That is incredibly dangerous for you. If they believe you have genuinely betrayed the FBI for Luca, you become a target for federal prosecution and criminal retaliation. You would be trapped between 2 worlds with nowhere safe to go. I am already trapped between 2 worlds. Alara's voice was steady. My career is finished the moment I walk into that meeting, regardless of how I present myself. At least this way, I control the narrative and give us the best chance of survival. She has a point, Sophia interjected. If Alara positions herself as someone who Luca turned, it actually reinforces his reputation rather than undermining it. It shows he is capable of exceptional manipulation and strategic thinking. The families respect that kind of power. Luca watched Alara carefully. She stood silhouetted against the afternoon light, her posture straight despite the obvious exhaustion. She was proposing to paint herself as a traitor to the institution she had served for years, to burn every bridge and eliminate any possibility of returning to her former life, all to give him a chance at survival. I cannot ask you to do that, he said quietly. You are not asking. I am offering. She turned to face him fully. I made my choice when I warned you about Sophia. Everything after that is just logistics. But Luca, you need to understand what this means. If we do this, if we present me as someone you turned, there is no going back, for either of us. We become bound together in the eyes of both the FBI and the criminal underworld. Whatever happens, we face it as a unit. The implications of that statement settled over the room like a weight. Julian looked between them, his expression troubled, but resigned. Sophia smiled slightly, as if this outcome was exactly what she had been hoping for. Then we build the presentation together, Luca decided. We show them Victor's betrayals. We position Alara as an asset I acquired, and we force them to choose between the truth and Victor's convenient lies. The next 3 days blurred together in a frenzy of preparation. Alara compiled the most damning evidence against Victor, while carefully removing anything that would compromise active FBI operations against other families. It was a delicate balance, providing enough proof to be convincing, while not creating additional reasons for the families to see federal prosecution as an imminent threat. Julian drilled Luca on presentation strategy, on how to control the room's emotional temperature, on reading the subtle signals that would indicate whether the other family heads were being persuaded or planning violence. They rehearsed scenarios, anticipated counter-arguments, prepared contingency plans for various outcomes. Sophia, surprisingly, proved invaluable in helping Alara prepare for the psychological impact of what they were about to do. Late one night, Luca found them in the study, Sophia holding Alara's hand while the FBI agent quietly cried. "I swore an oath," Alara was saying. "I promised to uphold the law, to protect citizens, to put duty above personal interest. And I am about to betray all of that, because I fell in love with someone I was supposed to destroy." "You are not betraying anything," Sophia said firmly. "You are stopping someone who is genuinely worse than my brother. Victor Ashford has killed innocent people, has trafficked in things that Luca would never touch, has built his power on the suffering of people who could not fight back. The law is not always justice, and justice is not always legal. You are choosing justice." That sounds like rationalization. Maybe. Or maybe it is the truth. Sophia squeezed her hand. "You are not perfect. Luca is not perfect. But you are both trying to do something right in a world that makes righteousness nearly impossible. That has to count for something." Luca retreated before they noticed him, but the conversation stayed with him. Sophia was right. Alara was sacrificing everything she believed in because she understood that sometimes the right choice was not the legal one. That took a kind of courage he had rarely encountered. The night before the meeting, Luca found himself unable to sleep. He stood in his study, staring at the lights of distant New York City, when Alara appeared in the doorway. "Cannot sleep either?" she asked softly. "Too much to think about. Too many variables I cannot control." He gestured for her to enter. "You should rest. Tomorrow will be difficult. Tomorrow I am going to walk into a room full of criminals and announce that I am a federal agent who betrayed her oath for you. Difficult does not begin to cover it." She moved to stand beside him at the window. "Are you afraid?" "Yes. Not for myself, but for you and Sophia. If this goes wrong, if Victor convinces them that we are playing games, then we will face whatever comes next together." She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I have been thinking about what you said at the pier, about the coffee being prepared right, about remembering your mother. Those things were real for me too. All of it was real, even when I was telling myself it was just part of the cover. I think I started falling for you the night you stayed late to help me finish that audit. Even though you had meetings the next morning, you brought me dinner from that Italian place, remembered that I was vegetarian, and you sat with me for 3 hours just talking about architecture and art and everything except crime. That was the moment I knew I was in trouble." Luca turned to face her fully. "I remember that night. You laughed so hard at something I said that you nearly knocked over your water glass. And I thought, this is what happiness feels like. This is what I have been missing while building empires and maintaining control. I am still not sure how this ends," Alara admitted. "Even if we survive tomorrow, I will be a pariah to the FBI. You will be navigating a fractured underworld, and we will both have targets on our backs from multiple directions. I know, but I would rather have that uncertain future with you than a secure future without you." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know that you changed something fundamental in me. You reminded me that I am not just the monster circumstances made me. You saw something worth saving, even when I had forgotten it existed." She stepped closer, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest. "Promise me something. If this goes wrong, if they decide to eliminate me to send a message, you will not do anything stupid to avenge me. You will take Sophia and you will survive. Promise me that." "I cannot promise that. Luca, if something happens to you, I will burn down everything Victor has built and dance in the ashes. I will make him regret the day he decided to threaten anyone I care about. And then I will make sure Sophia is safe before I let the consequences catch up to me." His voice was steel wrapped in silk. "That is the only promise I can make." She should have argued, should have insisted on the rational, strategic choice. Instead, She pulled him down and kissed him with the desperation of someone who understood this might be their last moment of peace before everything descended into chaos. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. "I love you. I should not, and it is probably going to destroy us both. But I love you. I love you too." The admission felt like shedding armor he had worn so long he had forgotten it was removable. "And I am going to fight like hell to make sure we both survive long enough to figure out what that means." The morning of the meeting arrived cold and gray, appropriate for what felt like a march toward judgment. Julian reviewed final details in the car during the drive to Newark, his voice steady despite the tension radiating from every person in the vehicle. "DeMarco will be the key," Julian explained. "He is the eldest, the most respected. If we can convince him, Castellano and Zhao will likely follow his lead. Victor knows this, which is why he will focus his accusations on you being a threat to stability. He will paint you as compromised, emotional, unfit for leadership. And we counter by showing I am strategic enough to turn a federal agent," Luca said, "which demonstrates control rather than weakness. In theory, yes. In practice, it depends on whether they believe Alara's conversion is genuine or just another FBI manipulation." From the back seat, Alara spoke quietly. "It is genuine. Whatever else they think, they need to understand that part is absolutely true. I am not here because the FBI sent me. I am here because I chose this. I chose him. That has to be clear." They arrived at the warehouse in Newark 40 minutes before the scheduled meeting, giving them time to assess security and position themselves strategically. The building was neutral territory, maintained specifically for rare occasions when the families needed to convene. Armed guards from each organization stood watch, enough firepower to start a small war. Inside, the space had been arranged with a large round table, 5 chairs positioned at equal distances. It was deliberately egalitarian, no one given positional advantage. Luca would enter as an equal, but he would leave either vindicated or dead. There was no middle ground in gatherings like this. Victor arrived precisely on time, flanked by 2 guards who looked more like military contractors than typical muscle. He smiled when he saw Luca, a predator's grin that promised violence. "Salvatore, I am pleased you decided to attend. For a moment, I thought you might run." "I do not run from problems. I solve them. We shall see." Victor's gaze slid to where Julian waited near the entrance. "Where is your FBI agent? I expected you might bring her as a character witness." "Oh, wait, that would require admitting she exists." Before Luca could respond, the other 3 family heads arrived. DeMarco entered first, 70 years old, but still moving with the authority of someone who had built and maintained power for 5 decades. Castellano followed, a severe woman in her 50s, whose control of the eastern ports made her one of the wealthiest criminals in America. Zhao came last, deceptively calm and quiet, his reputation for strategic brilliance making him feared despite his unassuming appearance. They took their seats, and the warehouse fell silent. DeMarco, as the eldest, spoke first. This meeting was called by Victor Ashford on grounds that Luca Salvatore represents an existential threat to our collective operations. "Victor, present your case." And so it began, the trial that would determine everything. Luca met Victor's eyes across the table and prepared for war. Victor Ashford stood, his movements calculated for maximum impact. He placed a folder on the table, photographs spilling across the polished surface. Images of Alara entering Luca's office, sitting across from him at restaurants, walking beside him through the city. Surveillance documentation spanning 8 months. "Luca Salvatore has been compromised by a federal agent," Victor began, his voice carrying the weight of manufactured concern. "Special Agent Alara Bennett, assigned to the FBI Organized Crime Unit, infiltrated his organization under the guise of a freelance accountant. For 8 months, she had access to financial records, operational details, and strategic planning. She collected evidence that could destroy not only the Salvatore family, but potentially all of our operations." Castellano leaned forward, her sharp eyes studying the photographs. "Where is this agent now?" "Excellent question. Despite being exposed, despite the obvious threat she represents, Salvatore has not eliminated her. In fact, my sources indicate he has been protecting her. He allowed personal attachment to override basic security protocols. This is not just poor judgment. This is a fundamental compromise that threatens every person at this table. DeMarco shifted in his chair, his weathered face unreadable. Luca, do you deny the existence of this agent? No, Luca said simply. Everything Victor stated about Alara Bennett's identity is accurate. She was FBI. She did infiltrate my organization. She did collect evidence over 8 months. The admission caused visible reactions around the table. Zhao's eyebrows rose fractionally. Castellano's expression hardened. Victor smiled, believing he had already won. However, Luca continued, his voice calm and measured, Victor has omitted crucial context. He is not concerned about FBI infiltration because he cares about our collective security. He is concerned because his own operations are far dirtier than mine, and he knows that federal scrutiny will eventually expose what he has been doing to all of you for the past 3 years. Victor's smile faltered. That is a desperate deflection from a man who knows he has been caught. Is it? Then explain why DeMarco's shipping operations have suffered 12 major disruptions over the past 3 years, each coinciding with Ashford expansion into the same territories. Luca pulled out his own documentation, sliding papers across to DeMarco. Warehouse fires, customs delays, anonymous regulatory tips, all of them traced back to shell companies that Victor controls. DeMarco picked up the documents, his eyes scanning the detailed analysis. His expression remained neutral, but his fingers tightened on the pages. Castellano, Luca continued, turning to address her directly. You lost 3 ports to federal crackdowns in the past 2 years. Each shutdown was triggered by anonymous intelligence provided to authorities. The digital trail leads back to cyber teams working exclusively for Ashford interests. He slid another set of documents toward her. Castellano studied them in silence, but her jaw clenched with barely controlled anger. And Zhao, your gambling networks have been compromised repeatedly. Customer data stolen, security breached, millions lost to competitors who somehow knew exactly when and where to strike. The forensic signature matches operations Victor has used in Eastern Europe. Zhao accepted the final packet of evidence without visible reaction, but his dark eyes shifted to Victor with new calculation. Victor stood abruptly. These are fabrications, documents manufactured by a federal agent desperate to save her target by creating division among us. This is exactly what the FBI would do, turn us against each other rather than face us united. Then explain the pattern, Luca challenged. Explain why every disruption benefited Ashford operations. Explain why you are the only family that has not suffered significant setbacks in 3 years, while the rest of us have bled resources and territory. Coincidence? Better strategic planning? Or perhaps, Victor's voice turned sharp, the fact that I have not been distracted by romantic entanglements with federal agents. You want to discuss distractions? Luca stood to match Victor's posture. Let us discuss how you sent men to kidnap my sister, an innocent 24-year-old graduate student who has never been involved in any of this. You used her as leverage to try forcing me into submission. That is not strategy. That is desperation from someone who knows his manipulations are about to be exposed. DeMarco's hand came down on the table, not hard enough to be aggressive, but firm enough to command attention. These are serious accusations. Victor, you attempted to harm Salvatore's civilian sister? I took appropriate measures to apply pressure during negotiations, Victor said dismissively. The girl was never in real danger. She was targeted on a university campus, Luca corrected. Shots were fired. Campus security had to intervene. Federal authorities are investigating. That is not appropriate pressure. That is reckless escalation that draws exactly the kind of attention we all want to avoid. Castellano spoke, her voice cold. I have reviewed these documents. The evidence regarding my port operations is compelling. If Victor has been manipulating federal enforcement against me while expanding his own shipping interests, that is an act of war disguised as misfortune. The evidence was compiled by an FBI agent, Victor insisted. Of course it appears compelling. That is what they do. They create narratives that serve their purposes. Then let us ask the agent directly. Luca moved toward the entrance. Alara, please come in. The warehouse fell into profound silence as Alara entered. She wore dark jeans and a simple jacket, deliberately understated. Her FBI credentials were visible on her belt, a deliberate choice to establish identity without ambiguity. She walked to the center of the table, her posture straight despite the palpable danger radiating from every person in the room. Guards reached for weapons. DeMarco raised a hand to stop them. Everyone remain calm. Let us hear what she has to say. Alara's voice was steady when she spoke. My name is Alara Bennett. I was a forensic accountant assigned to the FBI Organized Crime Unit. I was embedded in Luca Salvatore's organization for 8 months, with the objective of collecting evidence for federal prosecution. And now you betray your own agency? Zhao asked, speaking for the first time. His accent was faint, his tone genuinely curious. I am not here representing the FBI. I was placed on administrative leave and am currently under investigation for operational compromise. I am here because during my assignment, I collected intelligence on all organizations that interacted with Salvatore operations, including Victor Ashford. And what I discovered about Ashford activities makes Salvatore look like a legitimate businessman by comparison. Victor moved toward her, rage replacing his calculated composure. This is outrageous. You bring a federal agent into sacred territory, into a meeting that has not been convened in a decade, and expect us to believe anything she says? I expect you to verify what I present. Alara replied, not flinching from Victor's proximity. Every document I provided can be authenticated. Financial transactions are traceable. Digital forensics can be confirmed by independent experts. I am not asking you to take my word. I am asking you to look at evidence and draw your own conclusions. Evidence you could have fabricated, Victor spat. To what end? I have destroyed my career by being here. I face potential federal prosecution for assisting a target of investigation. I gain nothing by fabricating intelligence about you specifically unless that intelligence is genuine and more valuable to these families than whatever case the FBI was building against Salvatore. Castellano leaned back in her chair, studying Alara with sharp assessment. You are arguing that we should trust a federal agent who admittedly betrayed her oath, because doing so serves our interests better than trusting Victor's version of events. I am arguing that Victor Ashford has been systematically undermining all of you while positioning himself as an ally. I am arguing that his call for this meeting is not about protecting collective interests, but about eliminating the one person who discovered his long-term strategy. And I am arguing that you are all intelligent enough to verify the truth independently, rather than accepting convenient narratives from either side. DeMarco studied Alara for a long moment. Why did you turn? Why betray the FBI for Salvatore? Because during 8 months of observation, I learned that Luca Salvatore operates by a code. He does not traffic in the things that destroy communities. He protects people who work for him. He draws lines that men like Victor cross without hesitation. Alara's voice remained level, and because when Victor Ashford ordered an attack on an innocent graduate student to gain leverage, Luca refused to negotiate under those terms. That told me more about both men than any intelligence file ever could. Victor lunged. The movement was sudden, fueled by rage rather than calculation. He pulled a weapon from his jacket, aiming directly at Alara's chest. Luca moved faster. He closed the distance in 3 strides, positioning himself between the gun and Alara. The shot rang out, deafening in the enclosed space. Luca felt the impact, white-hot pain exploding through his shoulder as the bullet tore through muscle and tissue. He stumbled, but remained standing, his body still shielding Alara. Chaos erupted. Julian and the Salvatore guards drew weapons. Victor's men responded in kind. But before violence could escalate further, DeMarco's voice cut through the confusion like a blade. Enough! The authority in that single word froze everyone. DeMarco stood slowly, his 70 years somehow making him more commanding, rather than less. He looked at Victor with expression that promised death. You violated sacred territory. You brought a weapon to a convened meeting and fired it. These are unforgivable breaches. DeMarco turned to Castellano and Zhao. We vote now. Not on whether Salvatore is compromised, but on whether Victor Ashford has betrayed the fundamental codes that allow us to coexist. Castellano stood. I vote that Victor Ashford is guilty of systematic sabotage against multiple families. of attempting murder in neutral territory, and of bringing dishonor to these proceedings. His territories should be forfeit and distributed among those he has wronged. Zhao rose. I concur with the assessment. Victor Ashford represents a threat to stability and must be removed from leadership permanently. DeMarco looked at Luca, who was now being supported by Julian while Alara pressed her jacket against his bleeding shoulder. Salvatore, despite being the injured party, you have a vote. What say you? Guilty, Luca managed, his voice strained with pain. And I claim no portion of his territories. Distribute them as you see fit. I want nothing from him except assurance that he will never threaten anyone I care about again. So ordered. DeMarco gestured to the guards. Remove Victor Ashford from this territory. His family is dissolved. His operations will be absorbed. He is declared outcast and enemy to all represented families. As Victor was dragged away, still screaming accusations and threats, DeMarco turned his attention to Luca and Alara. You have created an unprecedented situation. A federal agent stands in our midst, possessing knowledge of all our operations. This cannot be allowed to continue without consequences. Luca straightened despite the pain. Name your terms. You have 6 months to legitimize your primary operations, or significantly reduce federal attention on all families. If investigations continue at current intensity, we will reconvene to reassess whether you remain a viable ally or a continuing liability. DeMarco's gaze shifted to Alara. And you, Agent Bennett, are now bound to Salvatore's fate. If he fails, you both face judgment. Choose wisely how you proceed. Julian helped Luca toward the exit, Alara staying close on his other side. As they emerged into the cold afternoon air, Luca felt the adrenaline beginning to fade, replaced by the full weight of his injury and the magnitude of what had just transpired. That could have gone worse, Julian observed dryly. We are alive, Luca agreed, his voice weakening. That counts as victory. Alara's hands were shaking as she maintained pressure on his wound. You stepped in front of a bullet for me. Of course I did. I told you. Whatever happens, we face it together. He managed a slight smile despite the pain, though I admit I had hoped we would have more than 6 months to figure out what that means. Then we better not waste them. She leaned close, her forehead briefly touching his uninjured shoulder. 6 months to legitimize operations, lose the FBI attention, and somehow build a life that does not end with both of us dead or in prison. Sounds perfectly achievable. Julian snorted. You both have remarkable optimism for people who just committed career suicide, survived an assassination attempt, and have been given an impossible deadline by criminal organizations. Welcome to our relationship, Alara said, and despite everything, despite the blood and the pain and the uncertainty, Luca laughed. They had survived, together, and for now, that was enough. 3 weeks after the meeting in Newark, Luca sat on the deck of a private house in the Hamptons, watching the Atlantic stretch endlessly toward the horizon. His shoulder was healing, though physical therapy remained painful and frustrating. The doctors said he would regain full mobility eventually, but the scar would be permanent. He found he did not mind. Some marks were worth keeping. Alara emerged from the house carrying 2 mugs of coffee, prepared exactly the way they both preferred. She had learned that detail about him during those 8 months of infiltration, and now it had become part of their routine. Small intimacies that meant more than grand gestures. Agent Hayes called, she said, settling into the chair beside him. He wants to meet tomorrow. Says it is important. Robert Hayes had been Alara's supervisor at the FBI, the man who had recruited her for the undercover assignment that had ultimately destroyed her career. Luca had expected the Bureau to come for them both with prosecution and fury. Instead, there had been silence for 3 weeks. Until now. Do you want me to come with you? Luca asked. No. This is something I need to face alone. Whatever consequences are coming, I need to accept them on my terms. She took a sip of coffee, her gaze fixed on the ocean. I knew what I was risking when I walked into that warehouse. I made my choice with open eyes. Choices and consequences are rarely equal in their weight. Maybe not. But I would make the same choice again. She looked at him, green eyes serious. You took a bullet for me. You put yourself between me and death without hesitation. That changes the calculations of what I'm willing to sacrifice. The next afternoon, Ilara drove to meet Hayes at a quiet diner in Suffolk County. He sat in a back booth, looking older than she remembered. 50 years of federal service had carved lines in his face that spoke of difficult decisions and compromises with ideals. "Agent Bennett," he greeted, though they both knew the title no longer applied. "Just Ilara now," she corrected, sliding into the opposite seat. "I assume you are here to inform me of the charges I am facing." Hayes was silent for a moment, studying her with the assessment of someone who had spent decades reading people. "The Bureau is divided on how to handle your situation. Some want maximum prosecution, obstruction, conspiracy, providing material support to criminal enterprises. They could build a case that puts you away for 20 years. Ilara kept her expression neutral, though her stomach nodded. "And the other faction? The other faction recognizes that you delivered Victor Ashford to us on a silver platter. His organization was significantly more violent and expansive than Salvatore's. We have been trying to build a case against Ashford for 5 years with limited success. You gave us everything we needed, plus a corrupt federal agent we did not know existed. That has value. So this is a negotiation. Everything is a negotiation." Hayes leaned forward. "You resign formally. You lose all benefits, pension, any future employment with federal agencies. In exchange, you receive immunity from prosecution related to your actions during and after your assignment. Additionally, you agree to serve as a cooperating witness in cases where your expertise or testimony would be valuable, subject to reasonable safety protocols." It was more generous than Ilara had expected, though the cost was still significant. Her entire identity had been built around being an FBI agent. Without that, she would have to reconstruct who she was from foundations that felt uncertain. "There is one additional condition," Hayes continued. "Luca Salvatore must demonstrate measurable reduction in criminal activity within 6 months. If he continues operating at current levels, if federal attention on organized crime increases rather than decreases, the immunity deal is void, and we revisit prosecution. You are tying my freedom to his choices. I am acknowledging reality. You are with him now. That means your fates are connected whether we formalize it or not. At least this way, there is a clear path forward if he is genuinely willing to change." Ilara considered the offer, weighing options that all felt inadequate. "I accept your terms. But Hayes, you should know that Luca is already working on legitimization, not because of threats or ultimatums, but because he wants something different than what he has built. That matters. We will see. Intentions are admirable, but results are what counts." Hayes slid a folder across the table. "Formal resignation documents. Sign them, and we have an agreement." She signed without hesitation. The moment the pen lifted from paper, she felt something fundamental shift. She was no longer Special Agent Ilara Bennett. She was just Ilara, a woman who had fallen in love with someone impossible, and was now navigating consequences she could never have anticipated. When she returned to the Hamptons' house, she found Luca in the office with Julian, reviewing business documents spread across every surface. Julian looked up when she entered, his expression carefully neutral. "How bad?" he asked simply. "Could have been worse. I have immunity in exchange for resignation and future cooperation, but it is contingent on measurable progress in legitimizing operations within 6 months. 6 months, Julian repeated. The same deadline the families imposed. Convenient, or inevitable. Everyone wants the same outcome for different reasons. Ilara moved to examine the documents they had been reviewing. What am I looking at? Phase 1 of legitimization, Luca explained. We are shutting down the most problematic operations. Anything involving substances that destroy communities, any protection rackets that prey on legitimate small businesses, any activity that generates significant violence, those end immediately. That will cost millions in revenue, Julian interjected, and it will leave a vacuum that other organizations will fill. Let them fill it. I am done profiting from misery. Luca's tone carried finality. Phase 2 involves converting what remains into licensed, regulated enterprises. The security operations become a legitimate private security firm. The gambling interests get properly licensed. The loan operations transform into private lending with actual legal frameworks. Ilara studied the financial projections. This is ambitious. You are essentially rebuilding the entire business model while maintaining enough income to support hundreds of families who depend on Salvatore operations. Which is why I need your help. You understand financial structures better than anyone I know. You can see angles that Julian and I miss. Luca met her eyes. I am not asking you to compromise your ethics. I am asking you to help build something that does not require compromising them. Over the following weeks, they worked with intensity born of desperation and determination. Ilara restructured accounts, identified which assets could be legitimized and which needed to be divested. Julian negotiated with tenants and employees, explaining the changes and helping transition people into legal employment where possible. It was not clean. Some operations could not be legitimized and had to be shut down entirely, leaving people without income. Some employees refused to transition to legal work and had to be severed from the organization. There were threats from rival families who saw Salvatore's withdrawal from certain territories as opportunity, and violence that erupted in the gaps they left behind. Sophia visited frequently, her presence a reminder of why the struggle mattered. She saw the toll it took on her brother, the way he aged years in a matter of weeks, as he dismantled an empire he had spent a decade building. But she also saw something new emerging. A man who was choosing a different path, not because he was forced to, but because he believed it was right. You look terrible, Sophia observed one evening, finding Luca alone on the deck where he often went to think. Thank you for that assessment. I mean it as a compliment. You look like someone who is actually fighting for something rather than just maintaining control. She sat beside him. How is it going? Honestly, it is impossible. We are trying to transform criminal enterprise into legitimate business while maintaining enough income to support everyone who depends on us, all within an arbitrary deadline imposed by people who have no incentive to see us succeed. Every day presents new problems that have no good solutions. But you are doing it anyway, because the alternative is continuing to be the man who hurt Ilara publicly to maintain reputation, the man who profited from suffering because it was easier than change. I cannot be that person anymore. Not if I want any kind of future worth having. Sophia squeezed his hand. She loves you, you know. Ilara really loves you. Not the idea of you or the challenge of you, but the actual complicated mess of who you are. That is rare. Most people never find it. I know, which is why I cannot fail her. She sacrificed everything for me. The least I can do is become someone worthy of that sacrifice. 4 months into the deadline, measurable progress was evident. The most violent operations had been shut down. 3 casinos had obtained legitimate gaming licenses. The security firm had hired former military personnel and was bidding on corporate contracts. Money laundering had been reduced by 60% through legitimate investment channels. But it was not enough. Federal surveillance continued. The other families watched with skepticism. And rival organizations probed for weaknesses, testing whether Salvatore withdrawal from certain territories was permanent or temporary. Then came the night that changed everything. Luca woke at 3 a.m. to find Ilara standing at the window, her silhouette outlined by moonlight. He moved to join her, his arm wrapping around her waist. "Cannot sleep?" he asked softly, thinking about futures, about whether what we are building is real or just another comfortable lie we are telling ourselves. She leaned back against him. "We have 2 months left, even if we meet the technical requirements. Do you really think the families will accept this new version of you? Do you think the FBI will stop watching? Do you think we can actually build something stable from all this chaos? I do not know, but I know I would rather fail trying to build something real with you than succeed at maintaining what I was." He turned her to face him. "Ilara, I am not promising perfection. I am promising effort. Continuous, genuine effort to be better than I was. That is all I can offer. That is all I need." She reached up to touch his face, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw. "I love you. Even when it is difficult. Even when the future is uncertain. I love you." That has to be enough foundation to build on. 6 months after the meeting in Newark, DeMarco requested a progress report. Luca and Ilara traveled to his estate in Connecticut, prepared to defend the changes they had implemented and argue for more time if necessary. DeMarco reviewed their documentation in silence, his weathered face revealing nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades of experience. "You have made significant progress. More than I expected, honestly. The reduction in violence is measurable. The legitimization of core businesses is genuine. Federal attention has decreased marginally." He paused. "But you are not finished. This will take years to complete, perhaps a decade." "I know," Luca acknowledged. "But we have begun, and we will continue. See that you do. I am giving you provisional approval to remain in your position, but understand that this approval is contingent on continued progress. If you backslide, if you return to old methods because they are easier or more profitable, we will reconvene, and the outcome will not be favorable." It was as close to success as they were likely to achieve. Not full acceptance, but acknowledgement that they were moving in the right direction. It would have to be enough. That evening, they returned to the private pier, where they had first confronted each other honestly, where everything between them had begun to shift from deception to truth. The sunset painted the water in shades of orange and gold, beautiful and temporary. Luca pulled a simple platinum band from his pocket. Not an engagement ring in the traditional sense, but a promise made tangible. "I am not asking for marriage yet," he said quietly. "Not while our lives are still complicated. While you might still be called to testify against people I once knew, while we are navigating between worlds. But I am asking for commitment. A promise that we face whatever comes next together. That we build something real, despite everything working against us." Alara looked at the ring, then at him, tears forming in her eyes. "I accept, but with conditions. Total honesty, even when it is difficult. Partnership in all major decisions. And if you backslide into old habits, not because you must, but because it is convenient, I will challenge you. Hard, because I love you too much to watch you destroy the person you are becoming. I accept your conditions." He slid the ring onto her finger, and she did the same with a matching band she had been carrying in her pocket, having anticipated this moment. "I accepted your rejection once, Dawn," she said, using the title as endearment now rather than distance. "But I will not accept anything less than your complete truth from now on. Then you will have all of me," he promised. "The broken pieces, the dark past, the uncertain future. All of it. Together." They kissed as the sun disappeared below the horizon. Two imperfect people who had found each other through deception and chosen to build something genuine from the wreckage. The path ahead remained difficult, filled with challenges that would test everything they believed about themselves and each other. But they would face it together. And somehow, impossibly, that felt like more than enough. It felt like hope.